Our mission statement is helping everyone take their next step closer to Jesus. We've been pushing this for a long time, and the goal is to push it till the end of time. We want to help everyone take their next step closer to Jesus. This is going to be a different sermon. I think sometimes we really like it when sermons are like, hey, give us a premise, prove it with 3 points. Preferably, all 3 points should start with the letter P so we can remember them. And then we go home and we have lunch. That's kind of what we like. That's what we're conditioned to. It's like watching a sitcom. It's supposed to be funny, supposed to be about 27 minutes, and then we go about with our day. We're not supposed to, not much supposed to happen. And I think a sermon like today's sermon is going to be one, not challenging necessarily, but I think it's going to be a movement of thought, and I hope and pray by the time that we're done, we have a different perspective on the world and life than we did when we started. Last week was heavy. We talked about hell. You can listen online if you want to. I thought we would lighten it up this week. We're going to talk about death. Just keep it nice and breezy. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14. Since the children, that's us, you and me, we're the children of God. Since the children of God have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death, he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. This is a series we have this week and next week. The series is called What Happens After We Die? And the premise is like the things we think are coming make a difference to now, but we haven't talked about that point in time in which we die. If you've had questions over the last several weeks, so for example, if you've wondered about, hey, you talked about judgment, you talked about eternity, you talked about the new heavens and the new earth, you talked about hell, I have some questions. That's fine. In fact, you've got a little note card that I spent a lot of time this morning putting in the backs of every other seat in the room along with a pen. I would love you to write those questions down and say, I would like to know about this. I want to hear a little bit more about this particular topic, or you didn't address this, and I would like to know about that. So if you have a question, please write it down. You can leave it in your chair, and we'll find it later, or you can put it in the basket. There's a basket in the back that says questions, or you can email me or text me. Your question can be dumb. That's okay. Don't hesitate to ask because you feel like, oh, that's not a legitimate or valid question. Please ask. So we're going to do that next Sunday. I have several already that people have asked over the course of these sermons, but I would love to hear your questions as well. So eternity is pretty abstract. It's pretty abstract. It's like trying to tell a middle schooler about life insurance. You know, it's like, whatever, I don't care about that. And we're like, that's coming, that's going to down the road someday. It's fun to think about, but it's abstract. You know, we've got laundry to do. We got a flat tire. Our car is in the shop for repairs. There's real things happening right now. The deal is, death is not abstract. You remember your first funeral? And you're like, and it floored me that there was an actual dead body in the room with me. That was hard to process as a child. Like there's a dead thing right there, and that thing used to be animated with life and had dreams and hopes. It was not abstract at all. And maybe if that's too much, maybe it was the time you lost your first pet and your parents told you that the pet had gone to a farm upstate, and now you're just now realizing maybe it didn't. Maybe it had passed away. Maybe your goldfish got flushed. Maybe it was gone. Maybe it had died. One preacher, I heard about this a few weeks ago, he had preached a sermon. I don't even know what the sermon was about. In fact, the people who heard the sermon didn't know what it was about, but they remembered the fact that he was rolled into the auditorium in a casket to preach the sermon. So it was time for the preacher to come in, and some guys come in, roll in the casket, and then the preacher pops out, ta-da, when he preached his sermon, probably about resurrection. Maybe it was an Easter sermon. I thought, wouldn't that be a memorable thing to do? I know it would cause a lot of trauma, and your therapist would wonder what in the world kind of church you went to. But caskets are hard to come by. You can't just go on Facebook Marketplace and slightly used casket. They don't want to let you. Even dark humor is a little unsettling. Have you noticed? Death is just it's not this abstract, distant thing, and we kind of want to keep it distant from us. Have you ever thought about why do we die? Why do we die? Like physically, Why do we age and die? Why does that happen? Well, it just happens. It's time. It's just things, we get old and wrinkly and then we die. Barring getting struck by lightning or heroically dying in battle, most of us have, remember how many weeks? 4,000. We have about 4,000 weeks. Why? Why that many? Why does that happen? Why biologically even? Why do we die? Real quick, I'll tell you why we die, and I'm an expert on it as having watched several YouTube videos about it. But the reason we die biologically is that our cells replicate over the course of our lives. Some cells, most of your cells replicate quite often. Some don't replicate very often, but they change. So physically, your skin and hair and all that stuff, you're a different physical person than you were about 10 years ago. Even your bones, the cells in your bones replicate. So you're different. You're a different human. They replicate. But every time the cells replicate, there's this little piece in the DNA called the telomere. And I know I'm pronouncing that right because, again, watched several YouTube videos, and so now I'm an expert. I did actually look it up. I almost emailed some doctors because I was like, I just don't want to get this wrong. But anyway, you have this telomere. And the telomere, I know you're like, wait, what kind of sermon is this? Hang on. The telomere protects the genetic information, so every time it replicates, you get a good copy of yourself. So you're copied just like you. You have the same, skin shape and tone and all that, but things do start to fray a little bit as we get a little bit older and we start to get wrinkles and all that. But the telomere, every time the cell replicates, gets a little bit shorter. I meant to bring a roll of toilet paper up here because I thought it would illustrate it well, but you can just imagine. Imagine toilet paper. I think we've all had experience with toilet paper. Imagine your precious genetic DNA is at the core of this roll of toilet paper. And every time your cells replicate, a little flap of toilet paper, square of toilet paper, gets taken off, and it gets a little shorter and shorter. And every time the cells replicate, the toilet paper roll gets a little bit shorter. And finally, you get to the toilet paper roll, and the telomeres are like, we're done. That's all she wrote. Time to pack it in. We're not going to replicate anymore. And once your cells can't replicate anymore, you take your last breath, organs fail, that sort of thing, and then you're gone. Your toilet paper roll keeps getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Now, some of you are like the Bounty with the 20 mega extra fluffy roll, and some of us are single ply, that's just the way it is. And some of you are thinking, wait a second, so if it's the telomeres that are shortening, how do I lengthen the telomeres? How do I keep them from shortening so fast? And you can do that, but you already know how. It's don't eat donuts and don't stress and don't do all the things that we know we shouldn't do. It's just all those things. They make it shorten faster, which is why doctors say when you do that particular thing, you're shortening your lifespan by so much because these telomeres are shortening. Now, I think when we ask the question of how do we keep our life from ending sooner, it presumes something about life and death that seems to be built into us or certainly built into our culture. I don't know if we're born with it or not. But asking how do we extend our life reveals a bias that we all have. We don't like to talk about it. We don't like to think about it. We don't like to be around it. But this ever-shrinking replication, our shortening toilet paper roll, means that at the end of this thing, death is coming. And that's unsettling. It maybe isn't scary. Maybe you're not frightened, or maybe it feels like it's far enough off in the distance, but it's unsettling. When I lived and worked in Iowa, at the church in Iowa, it was a small town, about 4,000 people in the town, and there was a larger town, about 30,000 people, Ottumwa, Iowa, where Radar O'Reilly's from, by the way. And it had, but these little towns in the southern Iowa area, people would go from one place to another to get lunch. And it wasn't a big deal to drive 40 minutes because your restaurant that you liked was in this other town. One day I was at home and I got a call from the preacher at the town 40 minutes away. And he said, I need you to do me a favor. Sure, what do you need me to do? There's this elderly couple in our congregation that drove to your town to eat lunch. Their son was in a factory accident this morning and he passed away. We cannot get a hold of them. We need you to go to the restaurant, tell them their son died, and that they need to get to the hospital where his body is. I vividly remember being on the phone thinking, how am I going to tell two people that I don't really know I don't have a relationship, that are just sitting enjoying their lunch, that their son is dead. How am I going to say that? There is nothing about that scenario that sounded in any way enjoyable or fun. I didn't even know how to do it. I felt physically overwhelmed by the task. I even thought, well, maybe I won't tell them. Maybe I'll just say I heard there was an accident. But I knew the truth. I knew what had happened. And if they asked, how is he? I knew I would have to tell them. And I remember fretting about this, and I'm pacing. I was in my basement at my house. I remember pacing back and forth like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And the preacher calls back, and he says, it's okay. They figured out how to call the restaurant, called them. This is before cell phones. Called them, and the couple's on their way to the hospital. And I'm just, even now, I can sense the relief that I felt not having to talk to these two people about the fact that their son had died. It's scary. Death casts a long shadow on our lives. A long shadow on our lives. And it does it in a bunch of different ways. There are direct ways. There are all the polite euphemisms that we use to describe when someone has died. We rarely just say, they're dead. We say something nice if we're in polite company, like they've passed, they've crossed over. If we're in polite company, we say other things like they've kicked the bucket, they're pushing up daisies. There's a German expression I came across this week that says they're looking at radishes from the bottom. I mean, it's a good one, I thought. You can work that into the next funeral you attend. So there are direct ways we try to avoid death. Anybody ever heard of Brian Johnson? He's kind of been in the news a little bit recently. Anybody heard of him? Just me? Brian Johnson, he had a tech company, sold it. Now he spends all his time and money trying to not die. In fact, you can see his shirt. His shirt literally says, don't die. He spends about $2 million a year, and he has this insane, awful-sounding daily regime of doing things to not die. It just sounds terrible and awful, and he hopes to be part of the first generation that doesn't die. Now, by the way, this is just a fun little, because he's not here, we don't have to. He and I are the same age, almost like by a few weeks. I'm no expert, and I'm not saying I look young, but I'm like, I don't think he's defeating death. I don't think he's winning. I think his toilet paper roll is still getting shorter. I don't know. It's Brian Johnson. You can look him up. Interesting story. There are indirect ways that we address this. There are people get involved with addictive behaviors because sometimes thinking about mortality is scary and they get involved in addiction. And there are people who get addicted to like health in order to fend off mortality. There's another person I've come across several times, and I never realized there was a way to use this person in an illustration, but here, today's the day. This is a lady by the name of Tess Christian, and she claims not to have laughed or smiled since she was a teenager to prevent wrinkles. I'm not one of those people like at the fair or the carnival that can guess people's age, but if I didn't know that she was 50, I think I wouldn't be far off. You know what I mean? She's spent 35 years of her life not smiling, not laughing. Is that worth it? To her, it is evidently. To avoid what? To avoid looking like you're getting older. And what would you be avoiding because you're avoiding looking like you're getting older? You're avoiding this idea of death. I know a person who will not fly on an airplane. He will not board an airplane. What are the things that he's going to miss out on in life? Yes, I know you can get there by boat, but seriously, what is he going to miss out on? I think all the billionaires going to space, I think that's their way of saying, I was here, I lived, I existed, remember me after I'm gone. I think it's stuff like that. I think all these are indirect ways of trying to avoid the concept of death. But then there are direct, there are indirect, and then there are deep subconscious ways that you probably do but don't even realize you do. I came across this week. This blew my mind. There's a whole academic field of study called mortal salience. Sounds like a heavy metal band. It's just very, very interesting. And what this field of study tries to do is how does death affect different human behaviors, including relationships, how people make purchases. There's consumer reports on how death affects impulse buys. So next time you're in line and you get that Twinkie because you're like, whatever, maybe it was because you were contemplating your eventual mortality and you thought, what is it going to matter if I eat a Twinkie right here and right now? It has a measurable impact on indulgent impulse purchases. Having kids can reduce death-related anxiety. That makes sense. Your legacy lives on. Continue my name. Did you know thinking about death makes you less scared of spiders and snakes? Did you know that? Because evidently your fear capacity can max out. And so if you're already afraid of death, I guess that spider doesn't scare you quite as much anymore. Thinking about death makes you less open-minded and meaner. So if you know some people that are closed-minded and jerks, maybe they're just thinking about death all the time. Essentially what I'm trying to communicate is that we are always in the valley of the shadow of death. We live in that valley. David talked about walking through it, but we're in it. We're camped out in it. We've set up shop in that valley of the shadow of death. Hebrews 2:14, since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by mortal salients. Interesting. But hang on. When you say death, when you think about death, what do you mean? What are we talking about when we're talking about death? I realize that seems like a dumb question. Person kicked the bucket. They're looking up daisies from the bottom, or radishes from the bottom. We think of death as a point in time. It's coming, but there it is. It's a point in time that is coming. Medical professionals pronounce a time of death. Bam, you're alive, and then you die. So we think of life and death like a line. Imagine a line like a little baby on a line. You're born, and it's great. The first few years of your life, you don't remember anything, but then you start to grow up, and you get married, and you get a job, and college, and kids, and all that stuff. This is life. This is life. And then at some point in that process, things start to, you hit your peak, and then things start to go downhill at some point in that process. And then we get old, and then we die. We call this life and death. And we know that there's something past death, right? We've been talking about in that series, but we know there's something there. We just don't know what it is. We're not sure exactly what it is. The Bible talks about life and death way differently. And I think we would do well to understand how the Bible conceives of these ideas, because I think it will transform this week. I think it might transform this afternoon if we had a better idea, a biblical idea of what the Bible says. If you're younger than me, many of you are, you're just going to have to trust me on this. There comes a point in your life where your brain tries to tell your body things, and your body cannot follow through with those things. Where you can envision this happening. I want to do that. You can think, okay, I haven't gone jogging in a while. Brain, let's go jogging. We put on the sweats, we put on the shoes, we're ready, let's go jogging. And your brain will move your arms a little faster. But you're like, no, we got to jog. And your brain's just like, no, I don't get that. By the way, I remember the very first time this happened. We were at the Minnesota Science Center with the kids, and they had this display on basketball. And I love basketball. I'm not a superstar athlete or anything, but back in the day when I was younger, I could grab the rim. That's pretty cool, pretty exciting. I remember being with my kids at this basketball display, and they had this hoop that was 10 feet. And I was like, hey, kids, you want to see what your old man can do? And I remember getting a running start, and I'm like, okay, brain, let's jump. And my body did this, but nothing really happened. And I remember thinking oh no, I'm kind of dusting the shame off myself, oh no, something has changed. Something has changed. Getting old happens, and you just start to feel man, when you're young, you can jump out of a tree. When you're old, your knees hurt when you see a kid jumping out of a tree. Your brain can write checks that your body can't cash. You're alive, And it's not like you're dead, obviously. And sometimes I know that we have a terrible way that we interact with the elderly in our society. This happened to me the other day. I was in a public place working on some of these ideas, and there were two teenage girls nearby, and they decided to make a TikTok video, and I was right in the video. And I was like, why am I in this video? Why are they making a TikTok? They're like dancing. And it dawned on me, my existence did not matter a whit to them. I was an invisible old person. It wasn't that there's this guy in the back of their TikTok video. I had an cloak of invisibility on me called age. They just did not care about me. Age comes for us all. The Bible uses the word death to describe not just that point in time when you flatline or your toilet paper runs out. The Bible uses the word death to describe a state of being. It is both physical and metaphysical. And this is what trips us up, because we can only conceive of death in one of those two ways, but the Bible uses it both ways. It ties these two ideas together. So it's not just that you can't run or jump like you used to, but you're not fully yourself. You're not fully the human you know you can be. That's what the Bible describes as death. You can't love the way that you intend to. You can envision it, but you can't do it. You can't be generous the way you would like to because there's something holding you back. You can't forgive like you know you should, or you've seen other people do it. There's something diminished or limited, and that is part of what the Bible calls death. Let me make my case real quick in 3 parts. Exhibit A, and this is how I conceived of this, so this is how you're going to hear it. Exhibit A of my case about how the Bible conceives of death. The prodigal son. In the story of the prodigal son, the dad says something fascinating about the situation. He says, "My son was dead, but now he is alive again." It's in Luke chapter 15. Obviously, the son wasn't physically dead. He was alive. But the dad wasn't saying, "My son was dead to me." That's not how he was thinking either. He was eager to bring the son back. But he was saying, "My son is living in this diminished metaphysical, spiritual capacity. He is not who I know he can be. He is not living up to his full self as a human. He is limited. He is diminished. He is existing in a state of death, physically alive, but living in death." This is Jesus, of course, telling a story. This is how Jesus spoke of death. Exhibit B, go all the way back to the beginning of the Bible, Adam and Eve. This really trips people up, but in Adam and Eve's story, when they're tempted, right? They say, "But God told us the day that we eat the fruit, we will die." And they took a big old bite, and they did not collapse on the ground. Their heart did not stop beating. They did not die, but they entered into a diminished way of being human. They entered into a death kind of life, physically alive, but living in death. Exhibit C, Jesus. You know how you were in school and you raised your hand in class and you said, "Mrs. Harris, can I go to the bathroom?" And Mrs. Harris said, "I don't know, can you?" And you're like, "What are you talking about?" "Yes, I guess I can." "No, the word is, may I go to the bathroom?" And you say, "Mrs. Harris, I'm in first grade. Can we skip this? Because I just got to go to the bathroom or we're going to have a problem here." And I know all of you, probably every single one of you has some verbal, tick is not the right word, but verbal, like a thing that bothers you, that people say it the wrong way. They use that word wrong. Like, have you ever been asked, "How are you doing?" And somebody says, "I'm good." And you're like, "Oh, it's not good. You're doing well." Come on. And if somebody says, "Hey," hey is for horses, right? You've heard all these things. Everybody has these little things. They're saying it wrong. It's not take it for granted. It's take it for granted. It's not supposedly, it's supposedly, right? We all have these things. I think Jesus had these things too, about how life really worked. And he corrected people when they spoke of death incorrectly. There's several times this happened, but one of the major ones is exemplified in this picture here in this story, where Jesus is asked to heal this little girl. And he walks there and the mourners are crying and they're weeping and wailing. And Jesus announces to the mourners and to the family, "This girl is not dead. She is asleep." Now, do you think that Jesus is like, "Oh, I got to figure out a polite way to say this"? That's not his style at all. He says this several times. He talks about healing Lazarus, and he tells his apostles, oh, hey, our friend Lazarus, he is fallen asleep, but we're going to go wake him up. He uses this language over and over, and Paul picks up on it as well. They use this language of sleep because they're trying to describe something, that this isn't the end, this isn't final, this isn't over and done with. I think we actually think this way too, that there's this way of existing in the world that we're not being fully ourselves. And biological death in Jesus' mind is just sleep because it's just this temporary interruption of the life function. But it's not that you're gone and that you're done. But I think we think this way too, and forgive me because I think this illustration has limits, but I think it does help us capture the concept when in our own minds. Have you ever loved or worked with someone who had a serious addiction? And they were, and I'm not talking like, oh, they really like, Doritos. I'm talking they like serious addiction, needed to be in treatment for it. If you've ever interacted with someone like that, when they're in the throes of addictive behavior, in some ways, they are not fully themselves. And when you love them, when you care about them, when you care about who they are, you know that. You advocate for them. I know this isn't you. I know this isn't the person you want to be. I know this isn't the way you want to be. There's a limitation or a diminishment to the way that they're being. And sometimes they're even the opposite. Oh, I know if you were in your right mind, you wouldn't say those things. I know if you were in your right mind, you wouldn't do those things. I know that's not you. You are living, the Bible would describe this person as living in a state of death. And the Bible even says even people who have given themselves to sin are living in a state of death. They're living in a state of death, but they can be brought back to life. Maybe you've even done this. Have you ever apologized to someone? Have you ever said, I don't know why I said that. That's not really me. I don't know why I did that. That's not really who I am. It's because we're saying we're not being fully ourselves. We have existed in this state of diminished capacity, the Bible calls death, and there's something better, and we know it, and they know it. Let's go back to our line of life. This is how the Bible would conceive of life. You're born, you're a kid, it's life, right? You can jump off out of trees, you can run. Kids cannot help but run. Have you seen them going to class? I know they're excited about class, but also they don't know how to not run. Have you ever been around a kid like that? They're just like, and then we're like, hey, go to school for 8 hours and sit still. Like, it's just these kids are like, they're full of life, right? When you're exhausted by a toddler, they're full of life. That's correct. That's a good way to think about it. I bet Olivia, I bet your sister is full of life sometimes too. Am I describing Isla right there? Yes, oh yes. You guys know how it is. You're like, we're there right now. We would like her to tone it down a little bit. I get that. Full of life. But then the Bible says, at some point in this life, we willingly choose a sort of diminished capacity, that we enter into death. We're still alive, heart's still beating, telomeres are still doing their thing, but we enter into death, a diminished capacity. We're not who we should be or could be. We've made choices to be indulgently selfish, not just like, oh, I deserve a piece of cake, but we will hurt others in order to benefit ourselves. We will cause problems in order to benefit ourselves. And this is crucially important. You notice the overlap. People who have entered into death often allow their death to hurt people who are alive, like little children. Because that death is emanating from them, because they're living in this diminished way. But then, the way Scripture talks about it is that Jesus offers this chance of rescue and that we can re-enter into life. And it's not just life, but it is life to the full. And that point in time of the tombstone and the grave when our telomeres finally say, we've had it, we're done, that's it, that's not where it stops. It keeps going. He says you've entered into eternal life. You've crossed over from death to life over and over again. And there's just lots of overlap because we do. Even though we have entered into real life, there's still the residual, the clinging on of the death in our own selves and in the people around us. And we live in this half-world, broken state of being. We've entered into life, but there's still the vestiges of death in us and around us. And one day, they will be fully shaken off. So what does all this mean? What does all this mean? Number one, we think about death and life exactly backward. Exactly backward. We think about it backward. There's this really beautiful, strange line from the Apostle Paul, and he's trying to get his audience to understand what real life is like. He was like, yeah, I get it. Your heart's beating. Yes, you're taking in air. You're exhaling. We get all that, but you don't understand. One day, you'll be really alive. Really alive. And he gives them this line, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 5. He says, while we are in this tent, we groan and we are burdened because we do not wish to be unclothed with the tent, but to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up in life. Our telomeres get shorter and shorter and shorter, and then Paul says, life. See, we think of it, they get shorter and shorter and shorter, and then death. And that's not the way he talks about it at all. That's not the way the scriptures talk about it at all. See, he's saying right now you're camping. You like camping? Some of you like camping. You think you like camping. Camping is awesome for a little while. It's so much fun for a little while. You're out in nature and the birds, and it's great. I love this God's creation all around me. There are beautiful moments when you go camping, but the novelty wears off real quickly. Like when you sleep outside in a tent, and you're like, whoops, I didn't realize that we're on gravel at an angle, and my air mattress keeps getting flat all through the night. And what is that noise out there? Those birds that were so nice in the early evening are killing me at 4 a.m. when they decide to wake up. And is there a spider? I thought I saw a spider in the tent. I'm not going to sleep at all. And the raccoons got in the food because they have opposable thumbs, and you're cold, and you're sore, and you just want to go home. We live in a tent now, is what he says. But one day this tent will be swallowed up with life. That's existence now. In fact, it's so funny because we were talking about this last week. We were talking about the shadow world or the nether world a little bit. But in some ways, the way the Bible describes it is that we live in the shadow world right now. That's our existence right now, is in the shadow world where things aren't 100%. And there are people who are messing things up and making life hard, and we make life hard for others. We live in the shadow world now. We live in the shadow of death, but one day we'll be home. Right now, things are dim and incomplete and they're broken, but one day you'll be able to run and jump out of a tree. You'll feel fully alive. One day. Right now, everything it's good. There are beautiful moments for sure, but one day death will be swallowed up with life. I feel that. The longer I'm alive, the more I feel that. We think about death exactly backwards. It's death and then life. But the second point I want to make is that a fear of that point in time, that biological death, the telomeres finally shortening, the toilet paper roll running out, the fear of death keeps us in a state of death. The fear you have, whether or not it's conscious or subconscious, keeps you living in a state of death because it doesn't allow you to live with the generosity that God says would bring you true life because it wants to hold on to things. It doesn't allow you to offer the forgiveness that would bring you true life because it wants to hold people accountable. It doesn't allow you to fully be vulnerable and love one another because it's got to be on the defense because we think this might be all that we have. Living in a fear of death keeps us in a state of death. Jesus said that the definition, the line of love, there's no greater measure of true love than laying one's life down for one's friends. And if we live with a fear of death, we cannot lay our lives, whether at one point in time or over the course of a lifetime. Jesus didn't just rescue us from that single point in time. He rescued us from a way of being. He rescued us from a fear of what is to come. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14, since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. And the good news is that we can step into real life at any point. That's the gospel, that you have access to life that is truly life at any point. I was thinking about our mission statement. Our mission statement sounds real ominous in light of this sermon. Oh, you are helping us I don't know. Cliff, what does that mean exactly? Could you define that a little bit? John chapter 5, these aren't on screen. I just want you to hear them. Just hear them. Hear my words. Hear Jesus' words and Paul's words. John 5:24. Very truly I tell you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life and will not be judged, but has crossed over from death to life. Romans chapter 6, verse 4. We were therefore buried with him through baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, we too may live a new life. So what is your next step?